Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 30 of Tough to Treat. Oh my gosh, we made it to 30. Wow, it's been amazing. I mean, we really appreciate everyone listening and giving us reviews. It's been a fabulous experience for us. This podcast is actually quite interesting, and it's a patient of mine who is a male and came in with some persistent low back pain. And through the clinical reasoning process that I use, I determined that his pelvis, yes, his pelvis was the source of the problem. And it was not about training pelvic floor, transversus, or multifidus. It was actually about decompressing. And in his history, he gave me the answer. Gosh, I wish they could all be like that. Just give us the answers, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoy it and look forward to hearing all of your comments. Hey, everybody, this is Erica Mello and my wonderful co-host, Susan Clinton. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. We're both sitting here, and I know when we're recording this, I'm not sure, I think this will be aired in September sometime, but it is the dog days of August.
We are. I'm squeezing out every moment of this summer as much as I can.
And it went by so fast, I think, don't you? I mean,
Yes.
for me it did.
I do. It's like Game of Thrones for me. Winter is coming. It's like,
Oh, but I love it. Thank God winter is coming, honey, because I can't wait, and I can't wait for that show to start.
Well, that's true.
Oh, my God. Anyway, let's get right to it. So I have actually a really interesting patient. He's obviously a male, and came in with pretty straightforward symptoms. And I've treated him and I've discharged him already at this point, but I thought he was quite interesting because he had a couple of positions that really made him feel better, and that's what I wanted to go down the clinical reasoning process with. So he was 45 years old. He was referred to me by a personal trainer here in New York City, who apparently every time he was working out, or there were certain exercises that would make him worse, or he would get pain in his right side of his low back. A day later, it intermittently would go down the right lateral quad, but primarily low back into the butt, sort of your standard, okay? What aggravated him was walking and standing on a train, like our subway here in New York, just standing and holding on, or just plain standing. And what was interesting is what made him feel better, two things. They're completely opposite positions. Planks. And I'm like, why would planks make you feel better? But they did. And the best thing that actually made him feel better was doing very deep squats, almost like sumo squats. He was pretty flexible. He could go all the way to the floor with his heels on the ground. Yeah, and no major imaging. I'll give you his history, actually. He's had this for about a couple of years, and sometimes it would go down into his lateral shin. He really loved to run. He had stopped running because of it. Every time he sneezed and coughed, your classic, he would get his back pain. He was running 3 to 4 times a week. And he did mention that when he was running, he noticed that he was a very heavy heel striker. And his balance on his right leg was pretty poor. He noticed that when he ran, he would offload that right leg pretty quickly. So he was working out with a trainer 1 hour, once to twice a week, doing your bear crawls, your Supermans, your planks, things like that. And his major goal was he just wants to get rid of his back pain. He had a couple kids, and he just wanted to be able to go hiking with them and walking. And it's pretty simple goal. I want to hike, basically, what was his goal. And, in the morning he was generally worse. No other past medical history or any medications that would, have any special side effects and such. So what I did, I looked at the first thing when he mentioned about the heavy heel striking. I'm just going to start with that because I want your opinion. I just had him walk. I was like, walking bothers him. He was still standing. I'm like, let's just get out of the box, out of the room. So I had him walk. And in our clinic, we have obviously the commercial carpeting, but people who are heavy heel strikers, you can hear them. And I'm a heavy heel striker. So this guy walked. He was literally so heavy on the heels. It was like pound, 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 pound. And right then and there, I said, that can't be. That's got to be a factor. So I'm going to stop here and let me know your thoughts just on that alone, because I think it was very important for him to be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a couple of questions here real quick before I go into what my thoughts are. Anthropometrics with him. Tall,
Oh,
lean,
sorry.
short,
No, small,
heavy.
short and average build, not heavy,
Okay.
not skinny, but short and average.
All
He's
right.
the filmmaker, documentary, so he sat a lot.
Okay. Was he like, when you just watched him get up and down from the chair and move around before he went out to walk, did he look like he was kind of a stiff person, or did he look like he was kind of a Gumby type guy?
Gumby.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking.
When you can squat that low without lifting your heels up.
Exactly. It's like, did this guy play catcher ever in his life?
I know.
Okay, so yeah, a couple of things. Why the planks make him feel better? Because he's using all of his postural control muscles.
Yeah.
And it's holding him together.
Yeah.
Feels good.
Yeah.
You know, when he's going into a deep squat, he has the range of motion to go all the way down, you know, and he's putting himself in a different position so that actually even though he's not going into like a big bunch of lumbar flexion, he is going into lumbar flexion.
Yes.
And that's probably locking him out a little bit, so it feels good. You know, when he's just standing on the train with the train, all the perturbations of the train, you know, and he's just walking along, and he's kind of a easier joint mobility type person. You have people who are a little bit more on the hypermobile side, you know, they can get into that joint irritation pretty easy.
Yeah.
And it just started, you know, but when you told me that planks made him feel better right away, that's where I went. It was like, I wonder if he's just like super moving through one area and stiff somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know, where is the stiffness, and why is he moving so much there, and why has that gotten irritated? And the heavy heel strike is really interesting because that kind of goes along with the perturbations. You know, if he's striking that heavy every time, you know, there's either not a lot of oomph behind his system, or you know, something is stiff somewhere that's really making him strike hard, and he's just getting the perturbations up into his back, and he's just gotten irritated over the years. That's why running hurts. Oof.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I said, you know, you know that when you were running, you were a heavy heel striker. Now when you're walking, let's work. Before I even got him back in the room, I was like, let me just correct this right here. So I said, just think about sweeping the floor. You know, I had him heel and toe walk just to make sure there was no major red flags. I did all that. So, but I just said, so I did some perturbations in standings. I pushed, you know, forward, backwards, see where his buckle point was. And, you know, you push him back and he's like, woo, falling on the floor, that type of thing. So I had him walk and I said, just try to sweep the floor, try to lift the heel, just giving him different cues. And he's like, oh, that's weird. I've never walked like that before. And I'm like, no, you haven't. But since walking is an issue, let's try and change it to see if it makes you feel better. And he was totally game for that, you know. So I had him do that for a good 5 minutes, sweep the floor, lift the heel. And then I rechecked some of the perturbations and they were better. You know, I had tried to push him back and forward. So he was, you know, much better. And as an aside, because I've discharged him already, that revelation alone, he told me, was humongous for him. Because just being aware of where you're striking your heel and getting your weight forward not onto your toes, but more forward, really helped him get rid of his symptoms with walking. I mean, just that alone was, you know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if he's a heavy heel striker, that means he's probably, and again, I can't see him, but I can imagine that he's a guy that sits on the back of his heels. You know, he just sits back that way. And a lot of people who are, you know, I hate to use the word hypermobile, but on the spectrum of the moving scale are more, have more mobility than people who are on the stiffer, part of the scale. You know, they tend to kind of ligament lean and, facet crunch and, do all of these kinds of crazy things. And, by having him do that sweep the floor thing, not only did you change the pattern and make him have to think about right, left, and doing some different things in his brain, so the patterning was different, but you were also intentionally bringing him into a new position, without saying, okay, you need to walk always leaning forward or this or that. You actually just kind of did that, and he could feel that when I walk this way, not that we want to walk him sweeping the floor, but when I change my pattern, I actually can feel better.
Right.
And right there, that's the huge buy-in, because his goal was, I want to be able to walk without pain.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be able to stand on the train and not,
And
you
yeah.
know, be miserable.
Right. Exactly. I know. So
Hmm.
so that was really big. And he, some people don't have a sense of body awareness.
Right.
He did, and for him to notice that he runs on his heels when he's running, I mean, that's a person who's pretty clued in and tuned in.
Hmm.
So right then and there, he felt better just with that. And so then I brought him back into the room, and I did my just basic, because he was feeling worse a bit after the trainer as well. And I'm like, well, let's just figure out why that is. So I did basic postural standing. Everything was ironically shifted to the right, pelvis, head, thorax, couple upper rib shifts. His head was forward, neck was C2, 4, 5, everything to the right, which doesn't make sense because you think he's trying to offload that side, but I think he was so aware of that right side for so long, he ended up just making himself more aware of it and standing on that side. It wasn't crazy, but that's just something I noticed. And I just did a quick AP, and obviously the thorax was way posterior to the rest of his body,
Hmm.
and that was just standing. So then I said,
Hmm.
based on his symptom pattern, into the butt, into the low back butt, in the lateral quad, I just had him, I had him bend forward, lumbar, and that was fine. He had no problems with that. And I had him do a quick back bend that flared him up a bit. But then I really wanted to see how he stood on one leg, because for me, running and walking are one-legged activities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just said, let me just, the other two, lumbar forward bend and backward bend, took a total of 30 seconds. Okay. So with him, I said, let's stand on the right leg. Okay. And I just watched. All of a sudden, I just saw something funky in the pelvis. It was almost like he was almost side bending, but I'm using my hands, but he stood on the right leg, and it wasn't a Trendelenburg or anything, but he just sort of rotated to the right. It was kind of just visually, okay? Then I had him stand on his left. He was fine, pretty rock solid. I then put my hands on him, because sometimes our vision plays tricks on us. So I put my hands on so I was splitting, this is what I did. I put my right hand on the top of his right iliac crest, on his innominate. And then I put my left thumb on his sacrum. So left thumb on his sacrum, right hand on top of the innominate, the iliac crest, on his right side. I had him stand on the right leg, and I felt my hands like go whoosh together, like they were together, like some form of compression was going on. And so that was that rotation I was seeing. So right hand on top of the innominate, left hand on like S2, left thumb, and he stood on the right leg, and my hands went together. I'm like, I don't really think that's normal. So, and he was symptomatic, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was, based on a lot of these compression patterns that I've learned, I said, let me validate this. So I applied all the compressions: anterior compression, posterior compression. So I applied compressing the front of the pelvis, the back of the pelvis, different oblique compressions, right anterior, left posterior, left anterior, right posterior, all the compressions I've learned over the years. And it made him worse, which I knew it would, because he didn't need more compression. But I wanted to validate that in my brain and get the buy-in from him. So what I also ended up doing, just because I actually felt like it, I had him do an active straight leg raise in standing, just to see if you could say it was neural tension. I just wanted to see if he could lift the leg up, how he did that. I had him doing it standing on his right leg, lifting the left leg up, and standing on the left leg and lifting the right leg up. Okay. And he couldn't really stand on the left and lift the right. It was the right that was hard for him lifting, and the same thing standing on the right. I didn't really gain anything from that, to be honest. I just wanted to test. I wrote that down. It wasn't really a test that I would normally do, but I had written it down, and I just saw the same thing I saw on one-legged standing, to be honest. So I do sometimes check like a standing body twist, just to see as well, because he said some of the moves that he did with his trainer, rotation and twisting, bothered him. That seemed all pretty okay. Then I watched him squat, because he said squatting deep really helped him. Really helped him. So I visually watched him squat, and he went all the way to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
No rotation in the pelvis, nothing. Then I put my hands on the same spot that I did when he was standing on one leg, right hand on top of the innominate, left thumb on the sacrum, and I had him squat all the way to the floor. I was going all the way down with him, and I'm like, God, can I squat that low? I'm pretty hypermobile, so I did. And what I felt with my hands there is the complete opposite. That my hands they weren't whooshing together or
right, they were opening up.
They were opening up. So he was squatting and they were opening up. So a bilateral squat opened him up, a one-legged stance compressed him. So I'm just going to get your thoughts on that before I move.
Yeah, well, that goes along with what we were talking about. You know, if he's standing and he's standing back on his heels, and his thorax is posterior, he's standing in a lot of lumbar compression. You know, there, and it doesn't feel good to him. And when he begins to come out of that and go into flexion, which is what you're describing here, that's happening at the lower part of the chain in the spine, is as he goes down into that opening, he feels better. It's relieving to him. Extension aggravated his symptoms, you know, so that, and I can only imagine what he probably looked like when he went down. I would imagine that his entire trunk was slightly flexed and maybe draped over his legs.
Of course, you
know, so that was a position of comfort for him, and sitting doesn't seem to bother him, right?
No.
Yeah, so he likes that. You know, it's interesting when we talk about compression, I just think we need to kind of make it clear. Planks are compression too, not in the same way that standing is. So, because planks require a whole lot of muscular activity around them in order to accomplish them, whereas standing you can do without hardly any kind of muscular activity.
Right.
So I think and again, I think the planks feel better because he's actually dialing up his postural control muscles.
Yeah,
that helps, that it makes him feel a little bit better to have those muscles switch on, and hold, whereas, in just standing on one leg, he's probably not using those as effectively, and it's uncomfortable for him.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, for him, he's, I said, you need to do more of what makes you feel better. It seems pretty easy and common sense, but not a lot of people do it. He's like, well, when I'm playing, because he watches his son play Little League, he's like, I always go into a deep squat like that. I said, do more of that. That's going to make you feel better. And we're going to use that as what we call like a reset exercise, which is what I learned with working up with LJ Lee up in Canada. So I said, any time you do, if you feel any symptoms, do your squat. Just do it. Just do it, and that'll reset your system, and you'll feel better. And he did, and he did feel better. More as just for short term. Okay. What I wanted to talk about more was that one-legged standing, because the walking and the running are one-legged. I think it's really important that we as clinicians assess that, and not just for not balance. I mean, it's more for what is his body doing? What is his strategy? And for him, I decided to go and assess. So after I did that, I got him on the table. I actually had him do an active straight leg raise in supine, and I know we've discussed this on the podcast before, so I'm not going to belabor it. And I did, some various compression patterns there, and it made him worse. Just confirming what I did in standing. I had the time, so I did it. And I then went around, because I don't particularly think he had a pelvic, quote unquote, pelvic issue. I think that there were certain muscles that may have been causing an imbalance of forces across the pelvis, basically, for lack of a better word. I think ultimately we want to balance the forces in the pelvis. And with him, he was, when he went into that deep squat, he was doing something to either release something in the pelvis. I mean, I'll ask your opinion in a second, but so I went in search of muscles. I did, I do it a certain way. I'm not going to belabor the process, but if anybody has any questions, they can email me. And I determined, based on that analysis, that you're going to laugh when when I tell you this one, his ischiococcygeus muscle was so ramped up and so hypertonic that I believe that was in part causing the compression I was feeling in standing, his proximal hamstring, I mean, they were just, it was a one fascicle. They were gripping, especially that ischiococcygeias. And that is, once again, I'm not a women's health therapist. I don't go internally, but I can palpate that thing externally. So he was like flew off the table when I poked my hand in there. So I just want your opinion on that, and then I'll move on.
Yeah, well, that's why the deep squat feels so good, because it puts it on a stretch.
Exactly.
Or it puts it in a position to where it doesn't have to work as hard. So in standing, one of the things I didn't ask is, was he a butt gripper? Because that's usually where you can see that, is that tucked under pelvis, and with that posterior thorax, oftentimes, and it's a deep muscles. It may not look like the big glute muscle butt gripping, but it's that deeper kind of tucked under type of
probably
thing.
was, but I didn't notice it.
Yeah, and it goes along with that lanky kind of movement pattern as well. But it's not uncommon at all to find overactivity of the upper, the medial hamstring and the ischio, coccygeus muscle, for sure. And those one thing would be interesting. Although he feels better in sitting, it would be interesting to know if he had pain with bowel movements or not.
You know what? I have to say that I have to get used to asking those questions, and I admittedly did not ask him that.
Well, that's okay. But I mean, I'm just, because that would be another one to kind of say, oh, yeah, because that muscle, I think, has a lot to do with sometimes when people are having, or if they're constipated, they're having trouble, with pooping,
you're
that
right.
could be a muscle that could be working, kind of over time, and makes them have to strain a lot to
that's great.
To get things past that. But sitting made him feel better. So it's interesting, because he maybe have just been just fine in sitting, going to the bathroom, so it may not have shown up kind of in that way, because sitting actually made it better. And, or deep squatting made it better. It was the standing and the walking that made it worse. And now that even feeds into the planks again. Other postural control muscles are turning on. So he actually doesn't have to use that muscle, in that way, because other muscles are switching on to help him.
Correct.
Which is really good. Yeah,
because I think if we have somebody that says, oh, well, deep squats make me better and planks make me better, well, clinical reasoning would show, obviously, those are completely different positions. And, and if that's what the patient's telling you, think about why, think about the why. You don't have to do it right then and there, but think about it like after. And okay, so what I ended up, because we really wanted to go find out what exercises were making him worse. So he gave me a detailed sort of idea or plan of what he did with the trainer. A lot was planks and supermans, and as I said, bear crawls and lunges and things like that. And he does do squats, but so the first day, I just basically sent him home with doing the deep squats as a quote unquote reset. And I had him also I don't know how you self-release ischiococcygeias. I had him try to get think about, getting a tennis ball under there and trying to release it himself. Also, when he's doing the deep squats, I said, in your brain, imagine your sits bones going wide.
Right.
That type of thing.
That's a good cue.
So a cue, and then with a little tennis ball release. So that's what I sent him home with. And then he came back and he told me that he was extremely aware of his posture when he was walking. Decreasing his heel strike made him much better. And I also told him, after he worked out with the trainer, so I used basically his one-legged standing, as we call a quote unquote self-check, your barometer. It's another thing I learned with LJ. So his reset exercise was basically his deep squats with the cue, keep your, imagine your sits bones going wide. His self-check was standing on one leg. I said, after each single exercise you do with the trainer, stand on one leg and let me know what exercise you feel worse with. So he did that. He did that pretty religiously. So he said certain exercises he felt great with, and then after other ones, a lot of the ones that involved the supermans, like the bear crawls, kind of made him worse. So I said, when you are worse, do your deep squat with your cue. And he did that, and it made him feel better. So we were trying to hone in on what exercises made him worse. And so treatment-wise, with the manual, I did some manual work on him. I ended up releasing the first few visits the ischiococcygeias. He did that on his own. I did a couple of just some manual release of some of his lower back muscles, just because they were so hypertonic. I didn't spend a ton of time doing that. I went in and just went into the sacrum and released some of the other deeper rotator muscles in through there, and his sacrotuberous ligament, his hamstring, things like that. that's really what I did from a manual perspective. And I don't know if I call it the butterfly position. I literally had him on his back and his leg. So he had his leg in like a frog leg. So his right leg would be on my shoulder, and I'm almost straddling the table. He's got his legs on top of my shoulder. So I'm facing him, and he's got both legs, his left leg on my right shoulder, his right leg on my left shoulder. And I'm literally have both of my thumbs on his sits bones. And I just did like I'll call it butterfly spread. I learned that years ago. I don't know where I learned it. Just to try to spread the sit bones wide like he did in the squat. And I just did a bit of that so that was more dynamic release. And that I did that maybe once or twice, not a ton. So it's interesting though, after the first visit, he said that he felt he was overworking his calf. I said, of course, because you go from heel strike to more forefoot, strike, midfoot, forefoot, you're going to feel like you're overworking your calf. So we gave him different, different cues. Sweeping the floor really helped. So I worked a little bit more on gait with him as well, just really get the cues down instead of like walking on your toes. Think about really, you need to heel strike, but get off the heel quickly. So I think getting off the heel quickly worked better because his calf, he didn't feel like he was walking on his, like the calf pain anymore. So those were the first, I don't know, the first couple of visits. I ended up doing, the two things I gave him in terms of the basic exercise were the tennis ball release of the hamstring and the ischiococcygeus, the deep squatting. Then I also had him in a little bit of a squat position. I call it like a chicken squat. You go in a squat position and you're internally and externally rotating your hips. Things like that. And I had him do that. I also gave him a couple stretches, just like cross body stretches to open up the bottom of the pelvis there. Either not the pigeon, but more just literally on his back, going across his body with his leg, with his knee bent, pretty straightforward, and to help to decompress that area. That he said really, really worked well with him. And then what he did, he came back. I only treated him for 4 or 5 visits. He actually did quite well. But the thing that I want to sort of hone in on is that after each exercise that he did with the trainer, he would write down and report back which ones actually made him worse. So the ones that made him worse were, interestingly enough, the plank was getting him worse as we were moving forward. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Yeah. So we modified the planks a little bit. I said I said I wouldn't do Supermans right now. That's a lot of overactivity of your back. His planks, he said, were originally made him feel better, but now they weren't feeling so great. So I had him do the deep squat after all of those, and then he felt better. So then I had him ended up doing, I don't know, I had him do a TRX, or I took a yoga strap, having him hold on to that and do deep squats. Like literally his home exercise program was 2 things. It was literally going into your deep squats with your cue, and then doing a holding onto a TRX rope and doing deep squats and just hanging out there for a while as well. And then doing the tennis ball release. And he worked on his gait, and I treated him on and off for looking at 4 visits, I think. He basically, his last visit, so I rechecked everything on his last visit. He said he's the best he's felt in years. And I was like, really? Because you almost get surprised because it wasn't that long I didn't treat him for that long. And, honestly, I rechecked the squat, the one-legged stance. He wasn't compressing. When he stood on one leg, he wasn't exhibiting any form of compression pattern at all. He was pretty rock solid. And that's it. I mean, I didn't do a ton with him, but sometimes you don't need to do a ton.
Right. And well, you helped him reset his neurological system into some new patterns that took him out of his painful patterns. So he had some more variance in his brain, which is like really good. Yeah. But the idea is he wanted to walk, and you helped him find a way to walk that wasn't painful.
Right.
So for people who don't understand, the reset, when she calls it a reset, you can also think of it as it's just a way to break up an activity that is hurting. So when you're doing something and it's taking you into a painful response, do something different. And for him, the something different was a deep squat, because that helped him. He liked it. It felt good. So it was a way for him to change, get out of standing, change, deep squat, come back up. Okay, I'm better. Because that particular position means a lot. So that's part of it. The other part of it is when you break up those activities and you don't have them keep pushing through pain, because people will walk through pain. They're just going to do it. It's the way we're kind of neurologically geared, is to keep moving through our environment no matter what. And, by getting him to be mindful of that and stopping and doing some deep squats and doing something a little bit different, helped him break those patterns up. And think, and then of course, Erica gave him a lot of choices about how he could, shift his weight on his feet with walking and doing some different things. He went a little too far forward, got a little calf pain. That happens to all of us as we exercise muscles that haven't been really utilized a lot in walking. So he backed off a little bit and found the midpoint in his foot that worked well for him. So you all can use different cues. You can say, get off your heel. You can say what Erica said, you're going to get on your heel, just don't hang out on it forever. Get on and get off. Some of the things that I'll do is I'll take my 2 fingers and go right down the tibia down onto the floor on either side of the foot, on the medial and lateral side where the tibia connects in, kind of where I'm going right over the talus and down. And I'll say, this is where the weight, this is the strongest part of your foot here. This is where everything comes together. So if you can kind of figure out how to kind of, shift your weight forward and back around there, that might be helpful. So, you can do different cues and different things. So, and then, the way that you use the single leg stance would let him know that if something he did right then and there bothered him or not. And I think the other piece of this is that as people go in and they exercise, they really don't oftentimes feel their symptoms, because they're exercising and they're working hard. And I don't know what his perceived exertion scale numbers were, but if you're working hard and you're doing things, you're not really paying attention to that as much, because he's so used to doing it. And then an hour later it's like, oh gosh, that's really bothering me now. And then it's hard to say what happened. So just using that, I think, also made him very mindful about, how am I actually feeling while I'm exercising too. And so it makes me kind of wonder about the planks. Was the planks because he just could do them, but he wasn't really thinking about how he felt right after a plank, versus now he's really focused on it, so it's interesting. Or maybe his strategy on his plank changed, and what was working for him to do the plank before no longer was a really good strategy, and other things that he was doing, or, because he had new different strategies, maybe his brain was trying, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I love the way that, you went back and looked at his planks and said, okay, let's modify it then. Let me see you do it, and, that way you can, but, again, I think his mindfulness about how he was actually feeling while he was doing things is a big key to this, because he really, really was able to take that to heart and make changes instantly. It wasn't like fighting about it. It was just like, okay, I'm just going to figure this out. And when you do that, you have to pay closer attention. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that. A lot to be said.
Yeah, being aware is half the battle. And I think, I chose the one-legged stance because that is, that is how I've learned this, is that, it really challenges the pelvis. It challenges a lot of body parts, but, and I picked that as his self-check, as his barometer, because even if he feels pretty good as he's exercising and he doesn't feel good after, I want to know what exercise made it worse. And that challenged the pelvis. And the squat is a good way to sort of reset the system, because that also challenges the pelvis. But it's an easy exercise that he could do well. And that is why he did it. I mean, the body chooses what it makes it feel better. And so I also so I gave him that as the reset. The one-legged squat, once again, was the sort of the self-check, the barometer. I'm just looking at my notes from the last visit. I ended up also just telling him to continue to use the tennis ball release, and work, do the hip stretches, the cross-body hip stretches, and also just lie on it. I had him lie on his back and just, we call it Bettany fallouts from Shirley Sarman, but I just had him do internal and external rotation in supine, just to work on the pelvis that way. And that was it. That's what I gave him in his gait, and he was good to go. So, and I thought that was interesting because he gave me a lot of information to work on, and that's kind of rare. And some patients just don't know what makes them feel better and don't know what makes them worse. And But for me, I felt that he didn't need to train glute med. He didn't need to train his transversus abdominis. He didn't need to work any of the muscles in his anterior chain. He really needed to change his strategy. He was getting too much. He literally was working too many muscles at the same time. So he needed to, once again, balance the forces across the pelvis.
Right.
And I
think
needed
to change his strategy.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, and that's what did it for him. So that's that. And I enjoyed working with him a lot. I have to be honest. For me, I'm very much of an analytical. I like to say what works, what doesn't, let's do that. And for me, that process really flew home with him, and he bought into it, and I had a wonderful time, albeit a short one, but I really enjoyed working with him. So, and I also discussed some ergonomics at his home office as well, but that was really much pretty much on the last visit. And that's that.
Sounds great.
That is
okay.
That. So anyway, yeah,
well,
thanks everybody.
As always, it was a pleasure. It's always fun to kind of pick out these idiosyncrasies and things that our patients come in with, such as, planks and deep squats make me feel better, that kind of thing, versus, walking and sitting and where symptoms are, and looking at things from a different point of view, and starting maybe with this person with a strategy rather than a breakdown. With other patients, we've had to break some things down and find, areas that needed the intervention, or where when we broke it down, we were able to get them to adopt some new strategies. That way, this guy tended to do better from just an overall strategy change type of person.
Exactly.
And you'll find that, sometimes people who are movers, you change their strategy a little bit and it just changes things for them.
Yeah.
And some people can adopt into that really nicely, and he was one. That was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
I was going to say thanks to everybody. We always appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens. Please leave us some remarks on iTunes. Give us a review. Tell us what you want to hear more about.
Also, the website, toughtotreat.com, should be up by the time you guys listen to this, and sign up for our newsletter, and we're going to have a clinical mentoring mastermind as well. So would love to hear all your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well,
thanks,
guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.